just waiting here 4 minutes until I start. No one's in the room right now, but even if there's not, I will continue on with the presentation so that we have recording of the part 3 of the Spark Learning Masterclass. As we're waiting for everybody to get in, this course is going to complete the. There we go. I have one person in. Hi, Yvonne. We're going to be waiting for everybody else to join. You're the only one here right now. So it is going, I'm going to start at 9 on the dot. I'm also recording this session. So just as a heads up, I've started the recording. Been getting a lot of views on the recording, so I think a lot of people are going back and watching them after the fact, which you're welcome to as well if you have other things this morning. And I'm going to start at 9 exactly. Go from there. Yvonne, do you mind typing into the chat where you are coming from right now and what discipline you teach? I apologize if you've told me that before in other sessions. Great. Do you teach other levels of chemistry or just regular chemistry, honors, AP? Great. I'm going to share with you the document that I'm creating for my online chemistry experience, distance learning. We're starting full distance. I'm sure you are too, in LA, here up in Northern California. And I'm currently right now building taking all the HTML5 PhET simulations, and then creating my distance learning regular chemistry curriculum around those, using them as sort of that challenge phase of the journey that we talked about in our last class. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure other people will join us, and if they don't, no problem. We can just be casual and go through this. And I do not remember exactly if you or the other people that are going to be joining us were in my last session, so I'm just going to assume for good memory retention in watching this presentation and all those watching the recording that you were not. So starting off with a review of what we've done in the past. My website is cyclesoflearning.com, and when you go to that website, it looks like this. And I've been blogging on this website for the last 15 some odd years. If you're looking for sort of an introduction to my reflective practice over the last 15 years, you can just click here on the starter pack, and it'll take you to a bunch of blog posts that I have really anchored myself to pedagogically over the years. And up here you can read more. The book here that I reference as well in the presentation really is a workbook for teachers and contains all of the information and lesson planning templates that we'll be talking about today. So back here, there's the book. And a review of our last class. First off, I just want to let you know that if you go to the website there, and I'll push these slides out at the end, q.org/Microsoft, you will find the recordings to the first 2 sessions on the YouTube channel on their site. So I know that you went to the site in order to get to this presentation. So they're all there. And I also have made a blog post on cycles of learning with each post. So just to remind everybody, this whole master's class is really more of a philosophical class compared to some of the other classes offered in these Microsoft trainings. Rather than talking about specific tools, we really philosophically were trying to tease out some elements of inquiry pedagogy. So on the right-hand side, you see the 5E learning cycle that I know fellow chemistry teachers and physics teachers really use this as one of the models to embrace inquiry learning. Inquiry learning being the idea of trying to spark student questioning about a phenomena and then use those questions as windows, if you will, into exploration that will then lead to a more active role of the teacher in facilitating the learning. And we noticed that when looked at side by side to sort of these traditional storytelling cycles, that there's some striking similarities. You know, in the hero's journey, the hero is called to adventure, whereas in inquiry learning, we are challenged to engage our students first. We talked a lot in the first class about how this can be challenging when our hero is not Luke Skywalker, when our hero is a freshman chemistry or sophomore chemistry student that isn't going to be in my distance learning class starting on August 17th, who hasn't necessarily chosen to be there. So how can I call them to adventure? And once I call them to adventure, how can I give them some sort of threshold challenge or exploration that that they're going to be willing to partner with me on and take risks on to try and answer those questions for themselves? And then what is the role of the teacher to fill in those gaps? And we're going to be talking a lot about this today. And then using that subsequent knowledge to transform the hero and then evaluate their progress. So, you know, this course is really, if anything, just to spark people's awareness in the fact that there really isn't, in my mind, a huge difference between things that we see as engaging in popular culture and in literature and in film and in cinema and in storytelling and in books, etc., and in the way we should approach our lesson planning. And to me, this has been a big eye-opening experience for me. In the last class, we focused in on this region here of the hero's journey, the exploration or the challenge. And there were I pushed out a challenge to everybody last time, and we had some good responses. I'm going to share one of those. And we have a couple here. One, I think, Yvonne, you actually responded just recently, and Jamie did last class as well. I challenge people to identify a topic in your curriculum that is challenging for students and to describe that topic below. Jamie said stoichiometry, and Yvonne, you just said physical versus chemical change. I would agree on both of those. And then I challenge people to describe a challenge you could create for your students that both empowers them to seek answers, but guides them towards misconceptions. And this being the key feature in the guided inquiry challenge. I mean, people talk so much about reframing these cookbook labs to be inquiry labs. Well, to me, when I do that, what I'm trying to do is pull back enough information so that they still can engage in it, but there's enough gap where they're tunneled into the need for more models. So Jamie said, allow students to oxidize small pieces of steel wool, obtaining the mass before and after. They realize that the mass increases slightly and then engage in a discussion as to why. Well, this is good. This will lead to discussion and subsequent lecture about chemical reactions through a lens of mass and quantity, and thus open the door to stoichiometry. So this is a really good one. And actually, this this is so serendipitous that this ties in exactly to what's happening on the Statue of Liberty when it first arrived, and now it's both oxidation. And it's kind of interesting. I guess a challenge question could be, is the Statue of Liberty heavier now than it was before and after? What I really like about Jamie's explanation here is it's doing exactly what we want to do in that first phase, which is create sort of an explosion of associative connections. Like there is a chemical reaction happening, and that chemical reaction is associated with mass changes. So this idea of quantifying chemical reactions being stoichiometry. And a lot of times this lab we see traditionally done after the fact. Why don't we do this at the beginning? Who cares if they don't know what an oxidation reaction, reduction reaction is, or what an oxidizing agent is? Why not do this at first with the big realization being, oh my gosh, the mass increases. It doesn't look like it increases, but it increases. That is really surprising. Why do we think it is? And then we can give them the synthesis reaction, and then we can relate what they already know in moles to the balanced reaction, and revisit it through a lens of stoichiometry. So really, really, really like this idea put out here. And that same thing really applies to the Statue of Liberty analogy, which is really, really cool. And Melanie, and there's a lot of others with us right now. That's great. Thank you, guys. I often don't know if what I'm doing is making any sense here, but it is for me. So I'm having fun. And I pulled up this video of this. I like the steel wool example in general, because one, there's fire. It's really cool. And the other is it's one of those cool, simple labs that, it really looks like the mass is decreasing to me. When I look at that, if I was a kid that knew nothing about chemistry, I'm seeing smoke come off that. It's burning, this idea of things leaving when they burn, which is often the case. But in this case, we know that oxygen's being squeezed on there. And it's just a fascinating, easy lab. One of my favorite demos to do, and if you go and you survey my Twitter stream, I think I posted this last year, it got a lot of retweets on it. Just taking a small piece of steel wool and putting it on a really sensitive balance, and just oxidizing it with a 9-volt battery and watching the mass increase on the scale can be a really, really great way to spark this activity. So I just really enjoy this one as really opening the door to so many different things. And if we look at it through a lens of what we talked about in the first class, that involuntary curiosity spark, being the unintentional exposure to a curiosity-inducing stimuli, well, this is really that violation of expectation spark. And if you weren't in our first class and you go back and look at it, the mass increasing is really violating those students' expectations about what's happening. So you have this situation now where we could have easily started off saying, today we're going to be talking about chemical reactions. And you could have designed a really great video about this maybe, where you said, Fe plus O2 goes to Fe2O3, and this is a synthesis reaction, and we could also call it a redox reaction, and here's what's happening, and we're going to put a 3 here and a 2 here, and I'm even going to show you this mole roadmap to teach you how to do the mole conversions, or, we can even do some fancier stoichiometry dimensional analysis, and now we're going to do it with our hands, and you're going to notice that the mass goes up. Well, the students already would know that the mass goes up, and it might be kind of surprising to actually see it in real life. But to do it first without having an idea what's happening, that's, to me, those are just like that's the essence. And it doesn't mean that you can't pull out these great concept maps later. And we can do a whole section on teaching stoichiometry and, why I think using equilibrium ice tables for teaching stoichiometry is the better way to go. And we could have a whole conversation about that, which I'm happy to do tomorrow in our office hours if you like. But right now, I just love this as an example. So what we're going to talk now is, okay, what next, right? And this was a hard presentation for me to put together because it's really what happens first is the hard piece. So really, and if anyone's out there right now and has if you could make sure you turn your mic off, that would be great. So what next? So we're really talking about this phase here. When we've now sparked curiosity, students have now done this lab, they've gathered data, and they have to present to the class, okay, why is the mass increasing? Okay, let's use particle level diagrams, let's use whatever we can. Why is the mass increasing? And this now is where we as teachers, the mentors, get to emerge, right? And we get to help the students transform. So I'm going to put that question out here to you all, and I'd like you to type it into the chat. What is the purpose? What do you feel is the purpose of the transformation phase as it applies to lesson design? And I'd like you to get as specific as you can. We've sparked curiosity, we've challenged our students, and now we're ready to grab them as the teachers and help propel them through this inquiry cycle. What do you think is the purpose of that transformation phase? So I'm going to give everyone a minute to reflect and type into the chat, and I'm going to be monitoring the chat here on my phone. So I'm going to leave this up. Yes, Melanie, I'm sorry about that. I will go back. And I hear one person saying the purpose is for students to try to explain why it is happening. It is the application of their observations within the challenge. What is the purpose of this phase? Let me pull up a more connected look. So what we're really trying to understand here is what is the purpose of kind of the explain and elaborate region, or in this case, the transformation. What are we really asking students to do here? Let me give everyone one more minute to tease that out. Okay, so as everyone's typing, I'm going to jump right in here and I'm going to keep this diagram up, and I'm going to go ahead and answer it the way that I think. And in one sense, it's kind of, we could say it's up here, you know, it says explain and elaborate. But let's talk about that and tease that out a little bit more, and that's really the purpose of today. So in class 1 and 2, we talked about strategies to spark curiosity, and then we talked about that idea of taking that curiosity and propelling students into a challenge where they're tunneled into their misconceptions. Okay, so now we have them, and this is this crucial moment where our lecture now is in response to that. It's not directing that. Let me say that again. The lecture is in response to that, not directing that, right? So it might be the same lecture I would have given, but giving it after the explanation, it creates a whole different sort of tone in the classroom where I can use their models. So my students have now presented their models and they've said, here's why I think the mask goes up. Here's why I think the mask goes up. Here's what I think that data visualization means. Here's what I think that poem means, right? And now we have them, and we are going to fill in those gaps, and we're going to deliver our lecture. And now we're going to try and merge the questions that they now had satiated with that new information and then propel them into an application phase. And that's what really that the hero's transformation means. It's taking the information that the way they thought the world worked, the way they now know the world's work, and now that that tension is alleviated, taking it outwards and doing something new with it, right? It seems simple, right? They're elaborating on it, but it's really that squishing together of their initial questions with our knowledge. And imagine if we didn't do the exploration first, there would be no squishing together. They would already have it. So I'm gonna move through here back to where we were. So what I want to talk about first here is this phase. Okay, so when the mentor appears, just tangible examples of how to structure that and what happens there. So I'm going to use The Karate Kid again as an example, and I keep using this movie as an example, not because it's the most PC example and not because it is everyone's seen the movie, but to me it provides, specifically in this class, one of the best metaphors for what I'm talking about here. Okay, so if you haven't seen the movie Karate Kid, it's you need to watch Karate Kid. It's an American classic. So I'm going to assume that everyone watching this has seen Karate Kid. So the movie Karate Kid, the beginning of it really perfectly follows this call to adventure, threshold challenge, and introduction of the helper. So if you remember the first time that Daniel meets Mr. Miyagi, who is his sensei, his coach, his helper, his teacher in the movie, it's not at the beginning of the movie. It's at this scene you see here on the left where Daniel is getting pummeled by the bullies, Johnny and his Cobra Kai crew. And actually, he gets beat up pretty bad before Miyagi jumps over the fence and helps save Daniel. So what happens when he helps save him? Well, he moves directly into this boring lecture on cleaning cars and painting fences, right? So one would say, like, why is Daniel motivated to engage in these very, very lower Bloom's taxonomy-esque tasks? Well, it's precisely because Miyagi decided to wait, right? So let's align these two things with Bloom's taxonomy. So the different tasks we can ask students to do. Now, Bloom's taxonomy doesn't mean rigor, right? Bloom's taxonomy is referring to the types of tasks they can do. But I'd argue that the movie starts off with Daniel engaging in these higher Bloom's tasks. He's trying to teach himself karate. He's trying to evaluate what school he wants to go to. He's trying to apply the karate that he taught himself, and he eventually gets beat up. And then it is only after that that Miyagi comes in and delivers these lower Bloom's tasks. Okay, but the cool thing about this is, why is he letting him teach him something so boring as maybe the definition of stoichiometry or how to wax a car? It's because he has already sort of gone through that initial threshold challenge, and he now realizes that there's this dissonance between the way he thought the world worked and the way the world worked. Now, this is corny, But it's very, very true when we think about where we position the mentor to transform the hero, our students, in lesson. Okay. Just think about if it was this way. Okay. If it was flipped like this and Miyagi showed up at the very beginning of the movie, even if it was on an iPad and he could rewind him as much, Daniel would not feel that need. Now, we often think that because we've flipped our classroom, let's say, and we give students a video to watch, that they're going to want to watch it, right? That it's going to be this exciting thing because they can rewind it. And that might be true at the elementary level where students are still really intrinsically motivated perhaps to be there. I'm not making any assumptions, but they're, my third grade daughter has more of a desire to watch videos from her teachers than perhaps my students, if they haven't been, let's say, manipulated into wanting to watch it. Or at the college level where students have chosen to be there, okay? Or maybe in one of my more advanced classes. But still, storytelling does not begin with this scene, right? And that would not have propelled Daniel to want to put himself in this very dangerous position just because he was given these basic tools, right? So it's precisely by starting with those higher bloom tasks. Starting with higher blooms is like calling the hero to adventure. Thinking about the teacher's role as, thinking about lecture is, instead of it being paint, thinking about it being more like spackle, right? That even if we have the same lecture planned, the mere fact of doing it after the hero has been called to adventure treats it like spackle. And I know I'm kind of talking higher level right now. And I love this analogy of paint versus spackle. Filling gaps and rearranging things rather than layering on and painting things. So if I look at a couple of case studies for me as to how this has been playing out in my distance learning, I'm just going to share with you a couple of my different lesson plans and the way that I structured them online according to this idea of delayed mentor work after student exploration. So this first one is coming from my last spring. I'm showing you this just as a way of showing you how I structured this way of lesson planning in the context of distance learning. So, and I know I've showed this in previous classes right now, but I can't overemphasize how crucial it was for me to have all my information in one simple place. So granted, this is a Microsoft workshop. I'm showing you Google Docs right now. That's because I'm at a Google school and I do use Microsoft tools as well. Some of you watching might be at a Google school. So I had this one document here where I structured all of my online lessons. I pushed this one document out to students, and that's all they got. If they needed help, they could go here to access our online Zoom for questions and answers. And if you notice here, each session I called a check-in, a lesson, and a check-out. And I structured each session according to this hero's cycle. And I really challenged myself to make each class one cycle. So the check-in was where the hero is called to adventure. That was the curiosity spark. The lesson is where students then engaged in some sort of challenge, and the checkout would be the where I would appear and I would give them information. I'd spackle in lecture, and then I'd send them off to do a new challenge for homework. So I wanted to pull up an example here right now. I highlighted one here. So if we look at this class specifically, this was Thursday, April 30th. I had them from 1 to 3 p.m. Students came to this document. They clicked check in, and they came to this Google form, okay, where they typed in their name. And I used Google Forms for everything in my classes over distance learning. And the first thing said, carefully view the below video. When done, click the link provided to begin the simulation and answer the below questions completely. Right, so this is where I'm calling them to adventure. This is a screencast that I made of me explaining how to engage in this simulation. They then click this link here. and it took them to an HTML5 PhET simulation, where then the students experimented with the properties of gases, okay? So that was that initial part, simultaneously serving the purpose of engaging them and causing them to explore. I love the PhET HTML5 simulations because they open up on any device. The students, and every time I had them do a simulation, I always made a quick screencast where they had to go through and watch that, where I gave them information on how to engage in the simulation. So that was the 1-2 punch that I used. Then I asked them these questions. I told them, pump some red particles in, hypothesize what they see, change the temperature, hypothesize what you saw, refresh, pump in, boom, boom. And I had them answer all these questions, okay? And then while they're doing this, I'm looking at their output responses in the spreadsheet. Right, and here I have all their names, and here I have their responses to what the students said. So I'm saying, the temperature goes up and why, and I'm reading all these responses as they go through. And these responses to this exploration, when there's more room for the gas particles to move, there's less pressure because they're not hitting the walls as much and are significantly slower when the temperature stays constant. So these are things students are saying as they're observing these simulations. So I'm using this as a formative assessment tool. I'm using this to guide the subsequent lecture that I'm now going to give them. Granted, I've already created it, right? Because I sort of know what they're going to say. But if this was live and not distance, I would then be looking at these as they're coming in and then just be planning the way I'm going to talk with them. Spackle, not paint. Okay, spackle, not paint. So then they go through that, and then the hero or the mentor appears here in the next phase called the lesson. So now I say, carefully view the below video and follow along in your notes. So this video now is me teaching them PV equals nRT, which is the model that they could potentially derive from the simulation. The equation being the wax on, wax off. The equation being the lower Bloom's taxonomy that I'm not starting with. I'm starting with the exploration. So, this is nothing new. This is basic inquiry teaching. The point is the lecture is delayed. Okay, so I have them watch this video right here. The video is inside the Google form. So they're at home now, they've done the lesson, they're now moving into this phase where they're watching the video. I'm hanging out in the Zoom room if they need help, but the lecture's not happening in Zoom, it's happening in this recorded video. When it's done, I do 2 specific things, and these are the things that I always do when I am appearing as the mentor. Okay, so when they're about to be transformed and go do something else, and I'm giving them these lower Bloom's taxonomy videos. I still flip my classroom in this phase primarily. I still give them a video to watch. It's just not the first thing they experience, okay? So they did the exploration in class or, in the distance setting, and now they're gonna watch this video. What do I do? People always ask me that. What do you do? Do you put it in Schoology? Do you put it in Google Classroom? What do you do? This is what I do, and it works really well for me. I put the video inside a Google form, okay, and I'm going to model how to do this in a moment. So I make a Google form, and I record the video, and I put it on YouTube, and that allows me to put it right in this Google form. So that I say, carefully view the video below and follow along in your notes. So they view the video in the Google form. I'll play a little clip. But those particles are not attracted to one another. Remember, gas particles want to expand. That's what they want to do. Okay, so they're watching that video. And then I do 2 things. During the video, to make sure they watched it, I don't do some silly behavioral accountability tool like tell me, what I said exactly at moment 2 minutes and 39 seconds. I don't do that. I have them do 2 things, and this is grounded in something called just-in-time instruction, where I have them do a conceptual review of the video, okay, and then I have them do a a quantitative review of the video. So two things. I do the conceptual first, and then I do the algorithmic piece second. So this is the equivalent of, okay, what would Daniel do after Miyagi had him wash the cars if he was doing that all in a video, right? So how would Miyagi be sure that Daniel incorporated all those lessons? Well, he would ask him to chew on that process conceptually and ask him to chew on that process mechanically or algorithmically. All right, so they watch this video, and then I have them fill out this summary. Okay, so it says summarize the video below by completing the ... spaces you see here in your own words. Okay, so I love using pre-filled Google Forms as templates for summaries on the videos. So if you notice here in the form, all students have to type in is this region right here. Okay, so I'm going to keep coming back to this. This is not their first experience with gases. In 2005, when I was teaching it, this was their first experience with gases. I would teach PV equals nRT before we would start, okay? Now, they are now summarizing and conceptualizing and thinking about and learning and acquiring knowledge about the model after they've gone through after they've been called to adventure, okay? So this video is about, and they type it in, this video is about gases. Specifically, this video taught me an equation called PV equals nRT. I really understood how to convert Celsius to, I can't spell it, to Kelvin. Ignore my spelling. I struggled to understand what R is. Questions I still have include, does this apply to gases that are also non-polar but big, right? So this might be what students fill out. And I love this because it forces them to really think about the video, but not thinking about it from a super mechanical way, thinking about it through these dichotomies of what they understood and what they didn't and what it was about generally. Now that they fill that out, I then ask them the question, you know, what is the temperature in Kelvin, blah, blah, blah. So now they're going to apply PV equals nRT. So this can be, you know, this can be anything. This could be a video about something in humanities where you're asking them to summarize, let's say, a video on the Great Depression, and then you're asking them something more specific about it. Let's say it was a video about the Dust Bowl, and you're asking them to summarize what the video was about, and then you ask them to tease out farming practices, let's say. So there's something conceptual and there's something algorithmic. So in asking him this question, I feel very, very comfortable that they've not only watched it, but they've really chewed on that information really well. I know it's a mouthful, but I think it would be kind of fun to go back and look at what were some students' responses to this video. Full disclosure, I haven't looked at this stuff since April 30th. But so we have 18 student responses. I'm just really curious to see what some kids said to the video. You know, so the first thing I would do though is I look at the algorithmic responses and I see if they're roughly the same. And what I see here is I see some a lot of differences here. So I see a lot of 3.6, 3.7 Kelvin, a lot of 0.027 Kelvin, 1 Kelvin, 3. So it looks like some people are off by a 10. We have some people that have their answers here like in 270. You know, those are people that might have, some of these students kept it in Celsius. Some of them converted back to Celsius. So there's a lot of misconceptions here. So even asking them this question, what I'm staring at right now is what I'm going to use as the launching off for the checkout, where I'm going to take their ideas and their misconceptions and further scaffold them. So some students are getting the answer in Kelvin. Some students are converting back to Celsius. We see that. And some are just doing their math completely wrong. So it's really interesting, but I see really 2 or 3 specific mistakes here. Let's read some of these. Some of the stuff is hilarious. This video was about the ideal gas law equation, specifically the equation itself and the conversions and what each letter represents and how to convert them. I really understood the step-by-step process of solving it. I struggled to understand how you'd find the other answers that you're looking for, the pressure or the volume. So there were no questions. Questions I still have include what is N. Questions I still have include, I know you said we aren't able to derive where the number R comes from online, but I'm curious about what this is. So this is great because now I can use this question to talk to them about some of the labs we would have done to derive R. So I'm showing you all this data to show you that that by simply asking two really pointed conceptual and algorithmic questions along with the lecture, and you can do this if it was a live Zoom lecture, you could push out this form, you know, right after your lecture, that we're really getting a lot of information. So what do I do when I look at this? I read the questions and I make sure I answer those. And then I look at the algorithmic responses and I look for misconceptions. And to me, it seems like students are converting to Celsius, or they're getting their math wrong, probably putting 0.8 instead of 0.08 for R in there. And if you're curious about how I made that pre-filled Google form link there, we can answer that in the Q&A if you have any questions about that at the end. So that is an example of what would happen during the lesson, and then students move directly to the checkout. So in this case, in this checkout, this is the transformation of the hero on this day is a really simple transformation. It's just asking them to do more practice problems. So I say now complete practice problems 3 through 5. We already did 1 and 2 together. So they have a book with a bunch of problems, and now I'm asking them just to do more practice problems. And sometimes that's as simple as the transformation in an online setting. It's, okay, merge together what you've done. In the classroom, what I would do now is I would send them off into another lab where I might say something like, I want you to determine the pressure required to pop a kernel of popcorn. And I want you to use PV equals nRT to solve this problem. So now they're taking their model and they're now applying it to a new scenario after they've done some practice. So that's one example. In terms of a tech tutorial about making that that pre-filled Google form link there, like I said, at the Q&A at the end, I'd be more than happy to talk about it. I love using these templates to help students process information, because what I eventually do is in week 10, it's going to say summarize the video above, but it's not going to have the template. And suddenly students are able to do science writing in a way that they acquired without really realizing it. It's why you can rattle off the name of a song or your phone number or something, because you've acquired it. So what I'm really trying to do here is teach them methods and processes for reflecting on the mentor. What I want to show you right here is how I'm wrapping my mind around what I'm going to do starting August 17th in my chemistry class. So starting August 17th, I'm going to be teaching according to this model. I never use any of these words with the students. I decided that I'm going to shift away from using Google Forms for everything, and I'm going to use one Google document that has everything. So I want to show you how I'm structuring that Google document so that you get an idea of kind of a tangible way that this journey is playing out. And then I'm going to push out a lesson planning template to everybody. So apologies, I showed this last time. Apologies for how archaic this might look, but what you see here is you see one Google Doc. This is for my first unit called Atomic Structure. And there are 3 days to this unit. And the way I did it is I made each day its own sort of self-propagating hero's journey. You can think about this whole thing as being one large hero's journey about the basic atomic structure. with each day having mini adventures mixed in. So I made these little bookmarks so the kids are going to get this. I'm going to push this out as a template to them on the first day, and they're going to get it. And the way I'm going to structure it is this. So we have 2-hour classes. Step 1, check in Zoom. So kids are going to click here to access our class Zoom. I'm going to play this video for them to watch together, which is this really intriguing video about what if atoms were the size of tennis balls. And it's just going to get them sort of asking big questions about atomic size. And then after they watch it, I'm going to be having them type in here in their own document questions they have. So this will be their own private document. And while they're typing those in, I'm going to have students share on Zoom. Okay, so I'm going to do a check-in live Zoom. And this is all around this curiosity spark, which is this violation of expectations around how small atoms really are. So that's why I'm going to start it off. So this is the call to adventure. Students are going to be engaged, hopefully, by the inaccessibility of these things we're going to study. How intriguing it is that they are so small, but we know so much about them, or at least we think we do. Then after they've done the Zoom, I'm going to send them off individually to do the challenge, right? So now they're going to go through a PhET simulation on atomic structure. They're going to click here to watch this tutorial of me teaching them how to use it. Then they're going to jump in here and do the PhET simulation. And then they're going to answer these questions. You know, describe 3 ways the Rutherford atom and the plum pudding atom are similar. Describe 3 ways they're different. Reflect on what they know about atoms. I'm then going to have them fill out this summary during this simulation. The simulation helped me understand. A question I still have is, I always say to students, do what's in blue. So everything in blue here, they're going to do. All right, so they're going to do that. And then I'm going to say, okay, last 10 minutes of class, I want you to come back in with me right now. They're going to come back together in Zoom, and we're going to do a simulation review, which is going to be a question on Pear Deck about atomic structure. So where I'm going to gather responses using the Google Slides plugin Pear Deck, and I can talk with people about that. After that, I'm then going to send them off to do their homework, and their homework is going to be applying what they learned that day by watching an intriguing video related to this stuff. So this is now the transformation of the hero, and this is the way I'm going to do their summary. This video is about, major points made during the video were, I really understand, I struggled to understand, a question I still have is. That's going to be over, and that's the way I'm going to structure one online class day. Meeting for 10 minutes at the end and 10 minutes at the beginning for the call to adventure, and then the mentor arrival, and then the challenge being smushed there in the middle, with the transformation of the hero also being there at the end. And I will put a link to this document right here in the chat for everybody. And as you can see, I'm going to use the same structure for day 2. And I'm going to use the same structure for day 3. And this is the way that I'm going to structure my online classes. I'm going to give students this as a template where they make a copy of it, and they have everything right there. And I'm going to do it again for Unit 2 when we get there. Hopefully, we won't be distanced at that point. So those are 2 examples of the way that I'm going to be structuring this. I know I'm talking a lot right now, but I get really excited because I'm in the middle of this planning phase right now. So if we go back to this Bloom's taxonomy piece, you know, when we call the hero to adventure, I just love this example. Bear with me. So, you know, Daniel's beat up. Miyagi jumps over, fills in the gaps he doesn't know. And then we have the transformation of the hero, the famous scene at the end, the famous crane kick scene. And I want to talk about this scene in the movie, because to me, it really gets at that explosion of associative connections that David Wallace was talking about in our last class. Like, what we really want students to be able to do. Like, what's the purpose of teaching this way? To me, it's the question is, what is your crane kick? Like when I teach students gases, what is their crane kick? Like what is the big realization that they are making, right? So let's watch this clip and let's talk about why this clip is so significant. Contact to me. Finish him. I mean, if you don't get excited right there, you do not have a soul. You know, that's just amazing stuff. So why is that so exciting? It's so exciting to me because he did not use the lower Bloom's taxonomy, the mentorship that he gave him to ultimately transform himself as a hero. He used those things to acquire a skill set that he then put in his long-term memory, chunked into working elements, and then accessed when he needed to do things like punch and block and all this stuff. But that wasn't karate. The lower Bloom's taxonomy wasn't karate. So when I'm teaching stoichiometry, what is the crane kick? Like, is the crane kick the realization that every time I fill my car with gas, every time I get a smog check, every time I think about the word a carburetor, or every time that we talk about efficiency in engines, that we're really talking about is stoichiometry? Like one day, am I going to have this realization that when I go shopping and I strategically buy food according to a recipe so that I don't have anything left over, that I am embracing stoichiometry? Like one day I'm going to have that realization. That's the crane kick, right? Because this is the scene where Daniel sees Miyagi doing the crane kick on the beach. Miyagi never, ever taught him how to do it. It was never something he explicitly taught, but it was ultimately the grand realization of the hero. So I'm going to teach my students how to do probably 50 stoichiometry, every type of stoichiometry problem. Excess this, limiting this, solve for excess, solve for product, blah, 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 blah. But I'm not going to explicitly teach them that crane kick, that moment when they're 32 years old and they walk, into a gas station and they fill their car with gas, or they do something and they have this realization about, oh my God, that was so important because it applies to these quantities that make this thing run, and those things have to be in right proportion to one another. And if they're not, the car, everything is messed up, right? The gas station loses money. The car is not running efficiently. Boom, crane kick. So that's what I love about this. It's that explosion of associative connections within the recipient. Because I would argue, and this is superlative beyond belief, but to me it makes the point. If we started with the lower Bloom's taxonomy, number one, we're ignoring the way stories are written, right? So first of all, we're ignoring research on engagement. But let's say we do what we normally do in the classroom and we start with lower Bloom's taxonomy, the wax on, wax off. When we ask students to create, they're going to be using the wax on, wax off. And when we ask them to transform, they're going to be using the wax on, wax off, right? That if we do not allow them to start with the information gap, then their brain won't have the authentic cognitive framework to then take in the knowledge, and that feeling of what it feels like to have an information gap satiated doesn't exist. So when they're asked to do the crane kick, that skill set is missing, and the knowledge that there are answers to unknown things, all the beauty that comes along with the tension between the way the world works and the way it works. And what I'm looking at right now, to me, is like the first 10 years of teaching. To me, it's here are what colligative properties are. Now I want you to do a lab and prove that the boiling point actually increases when I add salt. And now I want you to do a bunch of problems to do that. And now I want you to do the lab again with using a different salt. And I might think about the final lab as inquiry because I might give them a different salt. right? That has more ions in it or something, right? Instead of showing them some intriguing video about somebody putting salt on an icy road and asking them why, and then giving them a bunch of salt and say, well, what happens to the boiling and freezing point if you were to add it? And then having them tell me why, and then me saying, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're kind of right, you're sort of right, here's the model, and then asking them to apply the model to a new circumstance is a whole different way that's setting them up for their own crane kick, right? So I'm going to skip that full example here. I'm not going to skip that full example because I feel like this is a good one to bring things together. I want to walk you through a full example here that I used in part 1 that was I just have seen this lesson work so much in late elementary and middle school math classrooms that I just want to show you this full fleshed out example because it really brings the video of part 1 and this video together. All right, so the call to adventure in this case, students were asked to watch this video. It was an old Verizon commercial, so I'm gonna play it for you. I know I talked about this once before.
Making the big romantic gesture. That's powerful. Verizon. Get a Droid Razr M by Motorola in pink for $49.99.
All right, so that was the call to adventure. Students were then asked, what are you curious about in watching this? And their responses were then surveyed here on this Google form. And the way they structured this activity is the responses were then taken and I have this form. It's just been, I've had it forever. Their questions were then taken and copied, and a word cloud was then made out of the responses. The purpose of the word cloud was to convince students that there were trends in types of questions. And I know this is a review of part 1. So students saw that writer sent his girlfriend a picture of a heart shape from the ride. And come on, load. Come on. So we see. Let's try it one more time. If it doesn't work, moving on. Okay, so the teacher said, okay, well, we see here, we obviously see some words that have been used a lot. We see long heart route. So the teacher said, obviously, you guys want to know how long did it take him to make that heart route? But then they say, okay, what do we have to know before we know time? We got to know distance. So would it be safe to say that we need to know how far it took him to go around on that heart, right? Everyone says, yes. That makes a lot of sense. So that's then the question in the challenge, right, is how far did he ride? Notice that this has all been manipulated. So how far did he ride? And then these two things are pushed out to the students. Students then get a picture of the heart close up, where then they are challenged to figure out how far the person rode. Notice there's no scale on this picture. So they then go off and they might be given some hints like use Google Maps or, whatever you want, any resources you want. So they get that, they submit their answers into this form here. And answers are given, and the responses are then analyzed as a class, right? And we see a lot of different 27, 25, 22. These are all the different mile values people submitted. Okay, so the actual answer you can find online is 27 miles. monitored using this app called Runtastic. This was a while ago. And these are some outputs of what students created. So some students did driving directions, some students used online maps to figure it out. Okay, the mentor then showed up and said, okay, so what you were actually doing was this thing called circumference. You were figuring out the distance around this thing. We usually use circumference to talk about circles. Here is what it is. Here's a model for calculating it, blah, blah, blah. So students then write this down in their notes. They do a bunch of problems with circumference. Notice, it probably crossed your mind here. If we started with this lecture, then students might have all used circumference to figure out the shape of this heart. But by not starting with it, they immediately went to higher Bloom's tasks. They immediately started using Google Maps or scales or using these actual tools that make a lot of sense, right? So then the gap filling happened. By using this now, this is the gap filling. It's not paint, it's spackle. The hero is then asked to be transformed. The teacher says, okay, now you all used maps, but now you have a model. It's called circumference. You have an equation. It says circumference equals pi times d, or 2 pi r. Now what I want you to do is, using that, I want you to come up with an equation for this heart's circumference. So this is now the transformation of the hero. The hero is now asked to use the model to solve the original problem. It's like the perfect example of the transformation, because now it's a total crane kick, because they're going to walk around the world, might have a realization, oh man, how do we know how big the moon is? Or how do we know the mass of Mars? And these equations that we use to model things that we cannot see or cannot grasp. And these are some examples from students. You know, some assumed that we had 2 circles and a parameter. I love the spelling here with Jamie, Stacy, Susanna, and Selena. We have other examples depending on the shape. It looks like these students had a little bit more of a background in math. We have another example here. So these are all just really great. I show you this because it wraps the whole thing together, where yes, mixed in was a ton of circumference practice problems. But the whole point of this was getting them to this phase where they used the model. They used the model. They were manipulated into feeling a need for the model. Then they used the model to do a unique, complex task, all while getting everything done. So by delaying the mentor, you can get a lot of juicy misconceptions addressed and then leveraged later on. And it fulfills the whole cycle once again, because there's a lot of mistakes now in the way that they solved this and the way that they created it. So that opens up now new doors to talk about different equations and models, and maybe new cycles on models. If you are interested in using the lesson planning template that I use to plan my lessons before I start putting them in anything, you can go to the website you see here on the screen. You can either screenshot this or access it from these slides, which I will put in the chat when we're done. bit.ly/hero lesson template. So before I show you it, what I want to stress is, every time I sit down to teach a concept or to write a lesson plan, I don't write a lesson plan according to one day. I try and think about it according to a hero cycle, a 5E cycle. And then I write the lesson plan, and then I structure, okay, what parts will fit into day 1? What parts will fit into day 2? Can the whole thing fit into one day? Like I said, with distance learning, that's what I'm trying to do. But I write the lesson plan first, day and time agnostic. So if you click on this link, what you're going to see is the opportunity to make a template of this document. And once you make a template of this document, it's going to look like this, where I use all the hero language just because it makes lesson planning more fun to me. So who are my heroes in this lesson? I have it filled with an example, so you can take that, you can delete all that and put it in with your own. In this case, the heroes are sophomore chemistry students. What is the topic? In this case, it's acids and bases. What are the heroes going to do upon return from the journey? This is the outcomes. They are going to define and model weak and strong acids and bases, complete, balance, and model acid-base neutralization reactions, blah, blah, blah. So these are the outcomes. But I think about it as a journey. So what is the journey? Well, phase one is the call to adventure. What am I going to do to call them to adventure? I'm going to play this clip from Fight Club. What are the questions I hope that they ask? I hope they ask things like, what is that white stuff? Is that an acid or a base burn? Blah, blah, blah. What is the threshold challenge? Okay, using materials provided, explain what occurred in the clip from Fight Club. So 0.1 molar NaOH, household vinegar, pH strips, assorted glassware. So again, this is just a titration lab, but I'm using it as a way of them trying to grapple with this initial clip I showed them. What's going to happen when they meet the mentor? So this is going to be my lecture. They're going to watch a screencast defining and providing examples of strong acids and weak bases. And a titration equation. So this is not the first thing, right? This is the gap filling, not the paint. How am I going to transform the hero? They're going to use titration to determine the concentration of an acid and a base. Use titration to determine the total acidity of an acid. So again, this is just a typical acid-base reaction, but I'm treating it as the opportunity for them to merge what they got in number 3 with the questions that emerged in number 2. What are they going to do when they return home? I'm going to give them a quiz and have them write a blog post and do a group titration lab practical. So this is going to be how I'm going to evaluate the hero. And then I tag on what is the technology that I'm going to use when I'm doing that. So I really, really enjoyed this template, and I encourage you all to use it too. The slides for today can be found at this link, bit.ly/class3session slides, and I'm going to go ahead and toss that in the chat for everybody right now. And it is 10:02. So I'm going to open it up right now to any questions you might have. You can unmute yourself if you'd like, or type them right into the chat. And if you don't, you can always find me on my website and email me anytime. So I'm going to open that up right now and wait a few moments here to see if anything emerges. Okay, everybody, thank you for letting me ramble on a little bit here. I want to leave you with this one thing. By delaying the direct instruction, all of these things happen naturally, right? By waiting, the curiosity emerges. By waiting, application will naturally be related to those initial questions. So once we as teachers realize that we are not losing any time, we're just flipping and switching the order where the mentor appears, we start to slowly but surely realize that engagement is more of a sequencing issue in lesson planning rather than a pedagogical one, right? We don't necessarily have to change the way we teach. In some ways, we just need to switch the order in which we do things, and everything else will nicely fall into place if we have a strong structure, okay? So take care, everybody. Thank you so much. Really great working with you all. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Do you have time for one question?
Of course, yeah.
So a little bit, I've got it with your table. Like, so you're putting everything now in the one document just for streamlining your organization. Yes. But within that document, you're using multiple different technologies, and everything else is on a different page that's linked. That's one.
Are you talking about the lesson planning document for students?
Yes.
Okay. So, and actually, I said I'd put that in the chat. So let me put that whole thing in the chat before we even go and have that up on the screen, so that you have this. You should have view only privileges, and if you don't, I'll make sure I change that right now. Yes, so students are going to go here, and the Google Doc is like the clearinghouse. It'll link them to Zoom. It'll link them to FET. It might link them to Padlet or a Google form, but that is the one place where everything's going to be.
Okay, and so my other question was, you said you were so in love with the forms and then putting in those sort of sentence starters in the forms, but now you're putting those in their individual document?
Yeah, just experimenting. I'm just going to do it in a Google Doc right now, because what I was doing was doing every single lesson, right? I was doing step 1, step 2, and step 3 as individual forms. And I'm just going to experiment right now with what happens if they just do it in the Google Doc. Okay. And the reason I'm going to do that is it's going to give me the opportunity to give students more individual feedback on their formative responses. So what I was in the past was they'd fill out the Google form or the Microsoft form or whatever, and now I'd have a spreadsheet, and I couldn't really conversate individually with students. So specifically, it was this part where I said a question I still have. I was having to answer those questions live in our Zooms. So what I'm going to hopefully do now is highlight this and then comment on the side with the students individually. And I'm just going to experiment with it and see what happens.
Got it. And I wanted to also thank you for when you did your little post-lesson blogs, or I don't know what they're called. Those were really, really helpful. So
cool.
Thank you.
I'm going to do that again, by the way, starting August 17th.
Awesome. This is very inspiring. Thank you so much.
Okay, take care. Recording, stop.